Welcome to NewsNale, episode 17. Today we are interviewing Elizabeth Johnson from Trial Aware. She's the founder. But before we get there, remember NewsNails are brought to you by NailsEd, a learning and development platform focused on professional communications in writing, presentations, and meeting management. We offer online and in-person communications, teaching, and coaching. Please see our website at nailsed.com for details and pricing. But more importantly, Elizabeth Johnson, who is an assistant professor in the College of Nursing here at Montana State University, has founded in the last couple of years Trial Aware, and we'll hear more from her about that. She started her journey at Purdue, where she got a BA in registered nursing, then went on to Arizona State, where she got her master's in clinical research management. And then that wasn't enough. Went to the University of Arizona to get her PhD in nursing. She went out of there and worked in clinical trial management for McKesson and then for Icon Strategic Solutions. And now as an assistant professor, as well as an entrepreneur, Dr. Johnson explores the use of wearable technologies for patient safety in clinical trials. She looks to expand the research nurse role in clinical trials and methods of creating awareness of clinical trial patients, especially in pediatrics. So with no further ado, let's bring in Elizabeth. So welcome back, Elizabeth. You have quite a busy life. I mean, when I met you maybe a year ago in one of the competitions here, but you know, in addition to being an assistant professor and all that entails, and to trying to found a company and raise funding for it and get some help on it, you're also a mom. So I guess that's the first question I ask. How do you do it all? I mean, that is a lot. How do you keep your stuff from going crazy?
I think it's just extreme time management. And honestly, I include my family in what I'm doing. My son is my model for my product. My husband, who we are high school sweethearts, is one of my main champions. So it's turned into a family affair, which has made it more fun.
Awesome. So tell a little bit about your journey. How did you get to where you are now, a professor, an entrepreneur, a mom? What's a little bit about your journey?
Absolutely. Well, I guess the interesting thing is after I finished my original nursing school at Purdue University, it was 2012. So not a great economic time, especially for nurses, new nurses trying to find a job. I was moving to Texas from Indiana and was putting in applications everywhere, like a lot of our new grads were at that time. And my life changed because of a brutally honest recruiter who called me from Cleveland, Texas and said, "Liz, you have to stop putting in applications." And my blood just froze because that's the last thing you want to hear as a new grad. And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because you seem like you're a research nurse. Your whole CV talks about how you've done these posters, you've done all these improvement projects in our community. You're going to ask a lot of questions as a clinical nurse. Have you thought about research nursing?" And I didn't even know what that was. And here I followed her referral to the Texas Medical Center in Houston, Texas. And I got 2 jobs within 48 hours of applying. So my first job, and I always say I was born and raised in research. I was a research nurse at Texas Children's Hospital and Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. And my job was really cool that I got to be this hybrid nurse. I got to be part of cutting edge research. I got to be a non-sterile isotope compounder and actually make products. But I also got to see firsthand these people who I call humanity's heroes, who are giving their lives, their time to advance medicinal research, and especially with children and diabetes and endocrinology, which is where I started, their wisdom to say, I'm going to help the person, maybe not me, but somebody else ahead of me. It touched my heart forever. So when I started seeing huge gaps in communication and safety events among these children, even with the best technology, the best physicians, I knew I had to seek further education and really broaden myself. So I got my master's in clinical research. I moved on to adult oncology, where I started seeing the same problems. These participants were having events where the research-related information was not reaching their clinical providers, and they were experiencing injuries. Some of them died. And I wanted to know why. And I noticed that even with my master's and moving to a different facility, I still wasn't receiving answers. In fact, I was getting more questions. So I received my PhD and I was a University Fellow at the University of Arizona in Tucson, Arizona. And I moved on to the pharmaceutical industry as a contract research organization. I was a global early clinical development manager for Amgen and worked in acute myeloid leukemia, where I still saw these problems. So I saw that, top down, we were having problems with safety management with some of the most vulnerable and most admirable people that our country has. So after my PhD and after a really tragic participant death for me that really impacted me, I was sitting in an airport lounge and I literally pulled out a piece of paper and started scribbling out a wearable product that I thought, how can I be there for them? If I'm not there in person, can I help them get their information to their medical provider? So after my dissertation, which was trying to understand the proof of concept about my wearable and understanding safety in clinical trials and communication, I then came here in January of 2021 as an assistant professor, and my research has been dedicated to this.
So I was going to ask, when did the first inkling of the idea of, and it's trial aware now, right? That's what it's called?
So we have two different things. Yeah, we kind of bifurcated. So we have trial aware, which is the wearable hardware device, and then trial aware, which is the software.
Well, first, tell us a little bit about what that is and
Sure.
what the whole company and the startup is all about.
Sure. So the first inklings of it really started in about 2018, 2019, like I said, around that patient death that was fully preventable, and that was stemmed from an emergency care provider not knowing that the participant was in a clinical trial and gave some medication that actually caused a reaction with the investigative product, and the patient passed. And upon learning about that, I sketched out originally just a hardware, which was a wearable device that the patient could wear, that I thought, okay, it could house that critical information. I can get it to the provider by being on their wrist. Through my dissertation, I learned that ER urgent care nurses weren't really looking for wearables or sensors as much as we would assume so, at least I assumed, with all the new technology coming out. So I then looked at, okay, how can I help structure the software? How can I help also the wearable look better, be more attentive? So the software is called Trial Aware. It has the concomitant or contraindicated medications, so medications they can't have, symptoms, things to expect as a provider, as well as how to notify the research team through use of text messaging, where if they input their facility information within the software after they plug in the wearable or access the software, that it will actually text message the principal investigator of the research study, letting them know that a clinical provider requires additional assistance. And currently with the trialware hardware, we're undergoing additional prototype testing and finalization, and we're under provisional patent for both.
Oh, nice. So what are you focusing most of your time on now with the trialware and trialware?
So right now we are conducting a really large study here in Montana, where we have a simulated clinical patient room. And we actually have high fidelity simulation where it has audio that sounds like you're in a hospital. We have a hospital bed, so it looks exactly like you would have in a clinical room. And then we're using eye tracking. We're placing eye tracking equipment on clinical nurses and nursing students and telling them, it's a deception study, that they're going to meet a standard patient, which is, we have one of our grad students as the patient wearing the trialware wearable, and said, this guy came in with stomach pain. So we're going to have you just do your initial assessment. We don't tell them about the wearable. and ask them with their eye tracking glasses on and this noise going on and this person in front of them, and they have all of their equipment, vital sign monitoring, everything available to them. We look to see how they're doing their assessments. Do they see the wearable? And if they do they ask the patient questions? Do they try to learn a bit more about it? Do they plug it in and access Trial Aware, which is the software? So overall, looking at the workflow, but using objective measurement from eye tracking. We do interviewing afterwards and let them know it was a deception study and what we could do to improve the visibility of the hardware and the software functionality. And then we also look at their communication skill sets. How confident are they in their communication ability to relay information back to the research team or to another clinical provider, such as the physician? So it's a big study, and that's what we're working on this year.
Wow. How'd you design that study? Because, market research is an art and a science in and of itself. That takes specialists. So how'd you get that done?
I was a pandemic PhD. So this was the original study I had wanted to do at University of Arizona. My dissertation was online, where I showed them pictures of my son, who was my model, with the wearable on. And I originally asked them, what's important or what's significant to clinical care in this photo? And only 3 out of 40 nurses actually even identified the band as significant, which made me wonder, if I did this in person, will I receive different results if they have a living, breathing patient in front of them? Through advisement, under your advisement, as well as with the National Science Foundation Innovation Core summer cohort through the University of Washington, I had really great mentorship on how to hone and define my questions better, add some fidelity to the simulation, make it as lifelike as possible, so we could answer as many questions, such as, is technology even perceived by nurses? We have all these devices and sensors that we're trying to develop, and we're told and encouraged to develop all this new tech. But are we forgetting the biggest facet of healthcare staffing, which is nursing?
Wow. So, so you've been doing Trial Aware now for what, 18 months, 2 years? How long have you been working on this? Yeah. So what's the hardest part of being an entrepreneur?
I would say, as nursing, the learning curve. It is very steep, essentially learning a new language and learning an entire industry that honestly, especially the finances part, is very uncomfortable for a provider and for clinicians, where we look at best care and trying to understand how to do a pro forma and go to market strategy and all these different components is very challenging. But what I have noticed, though, is that with those challenges comes a lot of support, and there's a lot of people who are ready to mentor and guide you with those knowledge gaps.
Nice. What's your favorite part of being an entrepreneur?
Seeing something being created, from something that I scribbled on a piece of paper out of frustration and heartbreak and anger, and holding the prototype in my hands and saying, wow, this could be on a child's wrist, and maybe it can prevent somebody from being withdrawn from a trial. I think that's the most exciting. And also seeing my students' eyes light up and get excited about what is possible through entrepreneurship.
So you mentioned, a lot of great support out there. A lot of people think, oh, well, you're a PhD, you're assistant professor. Like, how do you go about, asking for help? Because like the idea, I think, of entrepreneurs is like, it's this individual that goes out and gets stuff done. It's like, but it's really not, right? And how do you build those relationships and those networks, and how important is that?
It's the only way forward, is to make those relationships and to have a team, because if you're an N of one, that's the only voice you're hearing. So the more voices that we can add, especially with expertise, is, I think, the most critical part of making sure you're successful. For me, I knew out the gate that not only did I have a knowledge deficit related to business, and I think when you're a PhD especially, you have very high comfort with the unknown and knowing that you don't know everything. They always say the more education you get, the less you feel like you know, and I think that's true. But when I was starting this, it was finding people who shared a story, who had experienced something very similar to what I was describing, who had heartbreak or felt touched by a clinical trial, who maybe had one undergo themselves, or had a different part of expertise that they felt that they could lend to the cause. And that's what helped create a team. So we have engineering, business, computer science, additional nursing, and we have students from each of those facets supporting this project. I think we have about 12 people total that on this team. And it's made all the difference because, like I've told our team, we have to get this right the first time. And we're literally being the whisper on that wrist. We won't be able to be there for everybody, but like a parent of one of our participants said, I wish I could have you in my back pocket. So it's a huge challenge to be on somebody's wrist, and now we're in somebody's back pocket. So we are slower in our development, but it's because we're highly purposeful and we add expertise in each facet.
Gotcha. Well, you mentioned you have to get it right the first time, but maybe you do, maybe you don't, because it sounds like, you came out with, oh, it's just going to be a wrist and a wearable, and now there's a software component and there's another. So it sounds like you are open to, hey, we can pivot, we can learn, we can adapt. It's not, because a lot of people say, oh, I've got this idea, we're going to crash forward no matter what. But what I've witnessed, and most folks I spoke with, it's actually listening to the outside noise and being brave enough to saying, maybe I don't have the answers, and maybe this is a way to go. Are you finding, what is some of the biggest, experiences and learnings you've had across the way, or the top learning that you've had along the way of doing this?
Absolutely. And I would like, that was a great clarification. And I should say that for the first time, I mean, when we have it on a child, ready to go and that it's commercialized. So I do apologize. You are exactly right that you'll never get it right the first time. And the finesse and the updates are from stakeholder engagement and customer discovery. When I was starting to do more interviews, for example, with caregivers, one of the greatest learning that I had was that caregivers wanted to be involved with the wearable. They didn't actually want it to be as passive. So I originally designed it to be something that was just provider, unidirectional in communication. They would take it off the wrist, access it, and be able to communicate with the physician over at the research team to understand how to approach plan of care. The caregivers of these patients were actually saying, well, can I access Trial Aware? Can I put notes in there? Can I chat and, add our symptoms, how we're feeling, where we're located? Can I be part of the technology and part of the experience, which was something I was not anticipating. I thought I would create a burden, but they didn't see that as a burden. They saw it as an act of love, that they love this person who's on their trial. They're very invested in supporting their loved one through a trial. And so they want to be able to communicate as well and be part of the team within the technology, which I thought was a beautiful thing, but adds definitely an additional component to the development. Yeah.
Amazing what happens when you actually talk to the users or the caregivers of the users, right? And absolutely. I think it was Steve Jobs said it like 10 or 15 years ago. Let's not just force technology down people's throat. Let's make something that they actually need and see what technology we have to support that need. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. He was much more eloquent than that. But so you've been this entrepreneur for a couple of years now. What advice would you give other aspiring entrepreneurs? Listen.
Nice. Stay curious and dig deep. I think those are the three things, and those are the things that I impart on my students, is that you listen twice as much as you talk. Having these long conversations with caregivers that may have felt really, over the time I had allotted, but you'll find these nuggets of information that really kind of lead you to that next clue. Listening to your mentors, listening to what's going on around you in the market, being very up to date on trade shows, industry, what's going on, seeing who's coming out of accelerators, understanding competition. And then as far as staying curious, asking those what ifs, not putting boxes over your head about what it should be completed, but what could be possible, and thinking ahead for your client. So what would they need in 5 or 10 years, or where should you be in 5 or 10 years? So for us, it would be predictive insights and business analytics about where our participants are and their safety measurements. And then digging deep is really making comfort with the discomfort. These are sometimes people's last hope for treatment. Right. This may be their only treatment. 60% of children with cancer go straight to a clinical trial. So this may be their one and only shot. So we have to make comfort with the fact that there's high stakes, and what can we do to dig even deeper within that experience to hopefully make it better.
Nice. So you mentioned, listening, staying on top of industry trends. How do you do that? What do you read, or do you listen? Is it podcasts? Is it websites? Do you have news feeds? How do you stay on top?
So I have a couple things that I use. The first is Becker's Review. So that is a resource that lets me know what's going on with hospitals around the United States. So for example, we just had an alarming report about hospital closures at an alarming rate. About 20% or so in Montana are at risk of closure. That lets me know that there's going to be wider disparities in access to care, which means my participants will have to travel farther, away from the comfort of whatever physician is managing their research trial, and potentially away from their normal, typical physician access, which means that my type of device is needed more now than ever before if we have these types of distance. So Becker's has been wonderful to know about leadership changes in hospital administration systems. The other thing that I love working with is the Nursing Institute of Healthcare Design. These are the architects and engineer and construction management who actually build our hospitals. You may wonder why that matters. Well, it matters for me in the fact of built environment will create attention, possibly attentiveness to my wearable device. It may create distractions that may take away from it. It also may interfere with connectivity. It may interfere with how the technology will be accepted. So I keep my ear to the ground to see what architects are doing and engineers and the next new wave of renovations and redesigns of healthcare systems. So those are two that I really like looking at. And then the American Nurses Association Innovation Enterprise. That lets me know what's going on with nursing innovation and some key important areas of interest for nursing, which is the largest group of healthcare providers that we have.
Gotcha. So it sounds like a lot of stuff's going on. It's not free. How are you funding all this stuff? How are you financing this?
So, so far we've gotten some pitch competitions that we've won. We also got accepted to the National Science Foundation's Innovation Corps, the national program, which is an additional amount of money. And then we submitted to be part of the America Nursing Association Innovation Accelerator, which will help us open up to additional funding and looking at additional venture capital as well as we start finishing up our study. And then there are additional opportunities that we're looking at with pharmaceutical industry and contract research organizations to look at this from a health and equity perspective.
Gotcha. Nice. Well, that's awesome. Well, we're going to slowly wrap up here, but before I let you go, I always ask this last question. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell you? Because we have a lot of either graduating people or people who are in the workforce and are starting to work or starting to be entrepreneurs. What would you tell your 21, 22, 23-year-old self, knowing what you know now?
That even though you may have people who say they don't understand, or it's not fundable, or that maybe this isn't as big of a problem as you seem, follow your gut. Do your research, listen to, put your ear on the ground and see what's going on. And if you still, like I did, keep seeing the same problem over and over after you looked at it from different perspectives, hold on to it. And find those mentors that can help maybe realize your vision even farther. So keep your mentors close, even as you start graduating, because they can be a huge instrumental catalytic movement in the right direction, especially with bigger ideas.
Great advice. Great advice. Well, Elizabeth Johnson of TrialAware, thank you so much for your time today. It's been awesome to hear more about this really fantastic technology and what you're doing. It is, you and I have talked about this. It not only is it saving lives, which is awesome too, but it's going to help accelerate getting drugs to market faster. And at the end of the day, that'll save even more lives down the road. And the more we can reduce the hurdles through this, Byzantine travel of clinical trial with the FDA and all the requirements, anything we can do to accelerate that. I know there are caregivers in the world that would stand up and applaud you. So I applaud you. Thanks for all the hard work you're doing. Thanks for teaching our students here at Montana State, and look forward to hearing more about this in the future.
Thank you so much, Peter, for this opportunity to be on your show, and I look forward to providing updates.
Awesome.